tax lien, or, well, in Arizona, for instance, they refer to it as a tax lien. In other states, they'll say tax certificate, or sometimes tax lien certificate. That's simply a piece of paper that you get that shows that you paid somebody else's delinquent real property taxes. In other words, in most states in the United States, something like 33 states, if a property owner doesn't pay his or her taxes, real property taxes, then investors are given an opportunity to pay those taxes for the property owner. And when the investor does that, the investor gets this tax certificate or tax lien certificate or tax lien. The reason that some states call it a tax lien is that when you get the certificate, in all these states you get a certificate, you also get an assignment of the real property tax lien, so that you have an evidence of indebtedness, that evidence that you paid somebody else's taxes, and that certificate is secured by a piece of real property, and it's the tax lien that secures the certificate to the piece of real property, hence the term tax lien. A tax deed, that relates to another method of collecting delinquent taxes. In many states, a minority of states, but 20-some states, if somebody doesn't pay the real property taxes, what happens is their property will be sold. And the high bidder at that sale, that's typically called a tax sale, will get a deed to the property. They will own the property. They get the property, and that deed is oftentimes referred to as a tax deed, or typically in states where the treasurer collects the taxes, it'll be called a treasurer's deed. So it's basically an oral bid auction. It's a foreclosure. You're really foreclosing on the real property tax lien, which secures the payment of the real property taxes. If they're not paid, they foreclose on that lien. There's a foreclosure sale, typically called a tax sale, and the bidder, you bid up on the property, the high bidder on the property gets a deed to the property, a tax deed. An individual can literally buy real property for pennies on the dollar at these tax sales. And it doesn't really matter whether the tax sale is through the certificate process or whether it's through the deed process. Now, the deed process is easiest to understand. What you're basically doing is foreclosing on the real property tax lien that secures the real property taxes that are due. You have a public oral bid auction sale, and typically the opening bid is just back delinquent taxes. And since back delinquent taxes are typically approximately 1% or so of the value of the property, you could have at a tax sale, where we're talking about a deed, where we bid up on the property, you could have an opening bid on a $100,000 property of just $1,000 or $2,000. And you could make a very good purchase if you attended one of these sales and say nobody else happened to attend, or nobody else attending happened to be interested in that property to bid against you, you could get it at that opening bid. And so obviously buying a $100,000 property for a couple of $1,000s would be extremely attractive. Now there's another aspect of this, and that is that the real property tax lien that's being foreclosed under most states' law is the first lien. And basically what that means is that when that first lien forecloses, it wipes out, it removes from title all other liens against the property, so that the successful bidder at the sale takes the property free and clear. And so if that bidder were to go to an auction and be the only bidder at that auction and actually get the property at the opening bid, that person could buy a valuable piece of property for just back taxes, which is literally pennies on the dollar, and would own that property free and clear. And that sometimes happens. I attended a tax sale in Polk County in Florida where I was literally the only person in attendance at that sale. In fact, I had thought that, I'd gone to the wrong location or I was at the wrong date. So I actually checked with the people that were conducting the sale to make sure I was at the right place at the right time, and I was. I was literally the only bidder. There were like 8 or so properties, and I got every one of those properties at the minimum bid. Okay, but in reality, it's the certificate states, or the tax lien or tax lien certificate states that are the most interesting, because in those states, if you buy the right certificate, that is, if you pay the taxes due on a particular property and get a certificate evidencing you paid taxes on that particular property, and the property owner doesn't pay you back, then you can apply for and get a deed, typically from the county treasurer's office, and there is no public oral bid auction sale, so that if you buy the right certificate, what happens is you, in effect, attend the sale like I attended in Polk County, where nobody else attends because there isn't any sale. Nobody else can attend a sale. Can't attend a sale that doesn't exist. So tax sales are very interesting, whether they be deed or whether it be certificate. Deed, though, the public's invited and the property could be bid up. Certificate, public isn't invited, only the certificate holder for that particular certificate is invited to the sale, which means if you get the property, if the certificate is not paid off, you always get the property for back taxes. Investors can get a high rate of very high rate of return in the tax sale area. One way that can be done is to get into the certificate states and buy certificates, because if what you're doing is you're paying somebody else's taxes, and that individual that you paid the taxes for has a period of time within which they can repay you the taxes, pay the back taxes. We say that redeem the property. They have the period of time to redeem the property, and when they do, they repay you what you paid for the property plus a certain interest rate return. In a large number of the certificate states, that interest rate return is very high. Let's take an example, Iowa. Okay, in Iowa, if you pay somebody else's taxes and you get that tax certificate, the property owner has 1 3/4 years, 1 year and 9 months within which to pay you back. And when they pay you back, they have to pay you what you paid. So you bought a certificate for $1,000. They got to pay you back the $1,000 plus 24%. It's actually 2% per month or fraction thereof. So 2% for every month you actually held that particular certificate. They've got to pay you that back. Well, 24% is a very nice interest rate return for a paper investment. But what makes it particularly attractive is that investment is extraordinarily well secured, because it's secured by the real property tax lien against the property that you paid the taxes on. So that property, you choose that property. It could be a single family dwelling in a nice neighborhood. And that real property tax lien, say in Iowa and almost all of the states in the United States, is a first lien. That means it's senior to all mortgages. So if you have an institutional lender with a mortgage in Iowa, that's actually, that first deed, that first mortgage is actually a second lien. It's second to the real property tax lien, which means that the real property tax lien holder gets paid off before the lender would get paid off. That tax lien is extraordinarily well secured, not only because it's a first, but because the taxes that you paid, say on a $100,000 property, might be just $1,500, $2,000, which means that your loan to value would be just 1.5% or 2%. You have what we say a 98% equity cushion. Now, what does that really mean? Well, if we take a look at the institutional lender, that made the mortgage loan, that institutional lender is now making, say, a 30-year fixed loan for 7.5%, 8%, and they have a 80, 90, 95% loan to value. What would happen if that property were to decline in value 50%? Well, if you've got a 90% loan to value, 40% of your loan has no real property to secure it. The tax lien, okay, where you've got just, say, 2% loan to value, if that property dropped 50% in value, your loan to value would be 4%. In other words, drops 50% in value, you still got all sorts of equity to secure your investment. Now, that's got to be extraordinarily well secured. I mean, far, far better than lenders, any institutional lender anywhere. And institutional lenders are getting 5.5 and 8, you're getting 24%. That's like three times the interest rate, and you've got security that's so much better. It's a heck of an investment. One thing I think everybody has to realize is that when somebody says that the real property tax lien is the first lien, that it's senior to the first mortgage or the first deed of trust, what that really means is that if you get that property at a tax sale, whether we're talking about an auction deed tax sale or whether we're talking about getting the property because you bought the right certificate, if you get title to that property, you get that treasurer's deed, you get title to that property free and clear of all those liens that are junior. Okay, senior lien is the first lien. All the other liens are junior. What happens is they get, as we say in the business, wiped out. Now, it doesn't sound like a fancy term, but that's the term everybody uses. They get wiped out. And what's wiped out mean? They get ripped off the property, off the title of the property, so that when you get that tax deed, you get that treasurer's deed, that deed doesn't have that mortgage against it, or that deed of trust, or that any other lien against it. You own it free and clear. Well, of the certificate states, where you pay somebody else's taxes and you get a certificate, and if they pay you back, if they redeem, they give you your money back plus an interest rate return. Some of those interest rate returns are astoundingly high, even though you have this fantastic security. And the reason for it is that the counties want either the property owner to pay the taxes. So take Iowa, where 24%, that's a very high return. If that induces the property owner to pay the taxes, because if the property owner doesn't, the taxes are in default, and the property owner is going to have to pay 24% for not having paid the taxes. But if the property owner persists and refuses to pay the taxes, then an investor is going to pay those taxes because the investor wants that 24% very well secured. Now, there are other states that actually have interest rates that can exceed the 24% because there are many states that have a penalty return. And what we mean by a penalty return is that it doesn't matter when the taxes are paid off, you get that particular percentage return. We could take a state like Texas, where technically it's not really a certificate, it's a deed where we say it's encumbered by a right of redemption. That is, you got a deed, but the property owner can buy the property back, can redeem the property, so it's a little like a certificate where you got the certificate and the certificate's paid off. Well, in Texas, the period of redemption for most properties is just 6 months. That period to pay off is just 6 months. And if it's paid off within that 6-month period, or if it's redeemed during that 6-month period, then it's a 25% penalty. Well, that means if it's redeemed, say 1 month into the 6-month redemption period, then you're getting 25% in 1 month, or on an annualized return basis, you're talking about a 600% return. If it's redeemed right at the last minute of that 6-month period, you're getting 25% in just 6 months, which means you're getting an annualized return of approximately 50%. In Illinois, you get an 18% penalty for each 6-month period that the certificate isn't paid off, isn't redeemed. So, for instance, if a certificate were paid off just prior to the end of the first 6-month period, then you would get 18% in one 6-month period, or that'd be an annualized return of 2 times 18, or 36%. If the property owner didn't calculate it right and waited another day, then you'd get 18% for the first 6-month period, and since you were 1 day into the next 6-month period, you get your 18% because it's a penalty. You get it no matter how many days you're into that period. You'd get your 18% just because of that 1 day, so then you'd have 2 times 18%, or 36% in a half a year, so that's an annualized return of 72% approximately. So you can see the rates of return can get quite high. Michigan's a very interesting state. The basic interest rate on a certificate in Michigan is 15%, computed on a daily basis. The redemption period is, or the payback period, the period within which the owner has to pay it off, is 1 year. And if the owner doesn't pay it off, that certificate off within 1 year, then the certificate holder can start the process of applying for a deed. But the property owner continues to have the right to pay it off until the deed is issued. But if it's paid off during that period of time after 1 year, and prior to the investor actually getting a deed, then there's a 50% penalty, so that you can get higher interest rate returns. Now, one of the investment strategies that I have used in Michigan is to go and buy over the counter. What happens is those certificates that are not sold at the annual sale, and the annual sale for all of Michigan's counties is the first Monday in May. So those certificates that aren't sold at the annual sale can be bought by investors over the counter, if you will. Michigan's a little unique in that all of those over-the-counter sales for all Michigan counties are handled by a state office in Lansing. For instance, if you were to buy a certificate over the counter in the middle of April for $1,000, and that certificate didn't get redeemed or paid off prior to 1 year after the date of the first Monday in May sale, and then you started the process of applying for a deed, and the property owner, got all excited and I don't want to lose my property, and then came in and paid you off or redeemed it, that person would have to reimburse you for the $1,000 that you paid for the certificate, plus suffer a 50% penalty, and give you an additional $500. So you'd get back $1,500, and you would have gotten that extra $500, say, in a period of maybe a month or so. If it were a month, then you would be making 50% in a month, and so on an annualized basis, that's 12 times 50%. So what's that add up to? 600%. 600%. So that investment strategy is very interesting. And of course, the other alternative is that the property